Thank you. Hello. Before I'll talk about moral responsibility and then duality of mind, I would like to say a couple of words about the structure of the talk. So first, I would like to say a little bit about reason responsiveness, which is nowadays a very important condition for being morally responsible, at least many philosophers think so. Then I would like to take a look at a couple of categories of empirical challenges against the possibility of being reason responsive in the context of moral responsibility. And then there will be some conclusions. So we'll start with reasoned responsiveness. Moral responsibility can be associated with determinism, and here the main problem is whether they are compatible, and some find it difficult to understand how can we be responsible for our choices and actions in a deterministic world. On the other hand, many philosophers think that determinism is a necessary condition if you want to talk about moral responsibility. And the important thing is that these are all metaphysical issues. But there's also another tradition of talking about moral responsibility here, which dates back probably to Aristotle. And here we assume that moral responsibility exists, and we reflect not whether our actions and choices are causally determined, but we think about how they are caused. So it's a very much a psychological discussion. For example, acting through ignorance or under compulsion are traditional are very standard situations where we say that ascribing moral responsibility is not justified, and these two situations correspond to two conditions of being morally responsible: will and knowledge. So compulsion is related with will, ignorance is related with knowledge, and I will focus on the condition of will. It's interesting that both of these conditions seem to be very important for moral responsibility, but there is no doubt that it is the will condition which is analyzed in much more detail. And it seems that there is a standard view of understanding will as reason responsiveness. So when we say what does it mean that the person lacked the will necessary to or required to ascribe her moral responsibility, we answer that she lacked reason's responsiveness, which is just an ability to act for reasons. And now a couple of things about reason responsiveness. Well, first of all, reasons are the beliefs and desires of the person, and there are two important components of reason responsiveness. First, and they are both necessary for being reason responsive. First of all, we have the ability to recognize reasons, and then ability to react to reasons. The first ability is the ability to be aware of the beliefs of one's beliefs and desires, and to be able to reflect on them in a very much deliberate manner. So, for example, when somebody buys a computer because it has the best performance price ratio, we say that she was aware that the computer had the best price performance ratio, and she concluded that this is an appropriate reason to buy it. And then we have the ability to react to reasons, which is just a simple ability to be motivated by reasons. So when we talk about reason responsiveness, we assume that reasons are components of the agent's decision-making process, and this process really occurred. This distinction is useful, for example, in the case of mental disorders, when we think about such cases in the context of moral responsibility. These two abilities can come apart. So, for example, such a person suffering from such a disorder can be able to react to reasons. She can be motivated by her beliefs and desires. She can be aware of her beliefs and desires, but it is not possible for her, at least in certain situations, to deliberate on them and choose the appropriate reason. And so the motivation of such a person may be unintelligible for us. Then this distinction is also interesting in the case of emotions. According to the standard view, emotions allow us to register beliefs and desires, and they can motivate, obviously, but emotions as such do not allow us to respond to reasons appropriately. So philosophers like to underline the role of deliberation when we choose the appropriate reason for action. For example, here is what J. Wallace says about the motivation and actions of rational agents are guided by and responsive to their deliberative reflection about what they have reason to do. Unless this guidance condition, as we may call it, can be satisfied, we will not be able to make sense of the idea that persons are genuine agents capable of determining what they shall do through the process of deliberation. And similar views can be found in the work of David Velleman or Christine Korsgaard. So pretty much I think it's a standard view on emotions. But obviously there are many cases in which people act on emotions, and we would like to ascribe moral responsibility for such actions. And furthermore, we think that it is plausible, at least intuitively. And this kind of theory of moral responsibility based on reason responsiveness is appropriate to ascribe responsibility in such cases. It can explain how we can do that by underlining the fact that reason responsiveness is an ability. So first of all, one may be morally responsible for an action independently of the actual reasons in the light of which he acted. So particularly, for example, we can be morally responsible when we failed to act for a certain reason. And what is even more important, even when one acts without deliberation, it does not have to mean that he is not morally responsible for the action in question. So reason responsiveness being an ability can help us in the cases of emotions when somebody acts and he doesn't really think about what he does. And also there's another important feature of such theories of moral responsibility because, well, once again, intuitively it seems plausible that we should ascribe moral responsibility even in the cases when a person didn't really have an ability to respond to reasons. For example, drunk drivers, at the moment of the action, the mechanism which produced the behavior wasn't reason responsive. So, for example, they couldn't deliberate in an appropriate manner on their reasons. and so on. And also, more importantly, it is assumed that people don't have the ability to respond to reasons in the cases of non-reflective automatic behaviors which are produced by traits. This is why these kind of theories based on reason responsiveness are augmented with historical elements. We understand moral responsibility as an historical notion. So how does it work? So we try to find some places on the way which caused the action when the person was reason responsive. So it works very straightforwardly. In the cases of drunk drivers, we find a certain moment in time when he began drinking. We can say that he was reason responsiveness before he began to do it. For example, we can reasonably expect from him that he should know that, basically, he shouldn't drink and drive. And in the case of traits, we have an assumption here that we can find reason responsiveness in the formation, retention, or expression of traits. So, for example, when somebody acts on the basis of his trait, we can say that he is reason responsive in the context of the expression of his trait if he is able to block, to override this decision when he arrives at the conclusion that it would not be an appropriate action. Now a couple of empirical challenges to this view of reason responsiveness, where the first is connected with an assumption that reasons present in this theory is that reasons are causes, and there are a lot of psychological experiments which seem to indicate that people lack direct access to the causes of their actions, and that folk psychological explanations of behavior based on reasons are not genuine causal explanation, but only, for example, rationalizations, instances of theorizing or self-interpretation. And a very well-known example of such a study is Storms and Nisbet's study on insomnia, in which the goal of which was the partial goal of which was to help these subjects with their insomnia. And first of all, they asked the subjects to record the time they went to sleep. They went to bed and fell asleep. And after a couple of days, they gave them a pill. It was a placebo, but they were told that they were divided into two groups: the arousal group and the relaxation group. And the subjects in the arousal group were told that the pill will cause increased heart rate, anxiety, and will increase their body temperature. So, generally speaking, it will cause symptoms which are common to insomnia. And subjects in the relaxation group were told that the pill would decrease their heart rate, their anxiety, and so on. And what is interesting is that it were subjects in the arousal group which ended up getting to sleep quicker, and subjects in the relaxation group ended up getting to sleep slower. And Nisbet and Storms explained this pretty interesting evidence that by proposing that in the cases of the arousal group, the patients were already aroused when they took the pill because they had insomnia. And after they took the pill, they attributed all the symptoms of their insomnia to the pill, which helped them to go to sleep quicker. And in the case of the relaxation group, Nisbet and Storms hypothesized that it looked like that they were supposed to get a pill which should decrease the symptoms of their insomnia, but despite taking the pill, the symptoms still persisted. So it caused them to feel even more anxiety. They thought they should think that their thoughts were especially caused an even greater anxiety to them. And so they proposed that a lot of things happened in the unconsciousness of the subjects. What is also interesting is that Storms and Nisbet interviewed the subjects after the completion of the experiment. And two things were interesting. First of all, all of the subjects try to rationalize, theorize, and self-interpret their behavior. For example, subjects in the arousal group try to explain the fact that they went to sleep quicker by saying that usually they fall asleep quicker at the end of the week. That, for example, they just passed a difficult exam and they think that it went well, so they are feeling less anxious. And on the other hand, the patients in the relaxation group also fabricated explanations of this kind. And what is also interesting is that, as Nisbet and Storms claim, the subjects showed no recognition of the hypothesized process and made little pretense of believing that any of the subjects could have gone through such a process. So they didn't really believe when they were told what really happened, or at least what Nisbet and Storms thought happened. Going back to reason responsiveness, it is worth noticing that experiments of this kind cannot really reveal that people are unable to act for reasons, or that there are no reasons at all. But what is important, such experiments show that there are cases when reasons we think are the causes of our actions are not genuine causes of our actions. So it seems that this experiment shows that there are situations in which we lack conscious reason responsiveness. Because, it is worth noticing that these explanations get off the ground only by granting people the ability to access their beliefs and reason unconsciously. Because all of this attribution was produced by unconscious processes. And the second category of empirical challenge is connected with traits. As you remember, a very important component of theories of moral responsibility, which are based on reason responsiveness, is the fact that moral responsibility is historical. For example, when you try to explain an action referring to a trait. And the challenge here is that trait-based explanations of behavior are systematically mistaken because the behavior in question is produced by situational features over which the person does not have any control. So once again, there are a lot of studies which indicate, at least seem to indicate something like that. But let us focus on a also probably well-known example of a study on money priming by Kathleen Vox. And in this study, well, the subjects were primed by money-related stimuli. For example, they were shown monopoly money, or there were pictures of money on their screensavers. And then they were asked to do certain things, and for example, it turned out that money priming intensified subjects' self-reliance motivation and made them less willing to help others. For example, the subjects were less willing to help another student, or they picked up fewer pencils when the experimenter pretended to accidentally drop them on the floor. So, subjects' willingness to help others can be explained by situational feature, money priming, and not by the traits, for example, selfishness, just being selfish. And, it is quite obvious they didn't really have any control on this situational feature. But, once again, here the evidence suggests only that there are cases when trait explanations are explanatory idle, but this kind of evidence doesn't seem to undermine subjects' ability to act for appropriate reasons. So the ability to override the unconscious influence. Let us think how we could demonstrate that people are unable to do that. It would require, for example, to show that people lack reason responsiveness no matter how high are the stakes. For example, no matter how important are the reasons. For example, in the motivation to help would be connected not with there being another students in need of an explanation of certain difficult task, but for example, there's a life-threatening emergency, and if people wouldn't be motivated to act on this reason, well, we would probably have better evidence that well, reason responsiveness doesn't really work. And the third type of empirical challenges are, I think, the more serious. In a way, they bind together what was already said about the previous two categories. Here, it is assumed that, well, in philosophy, it is assumed that reason responsiveness is of one piece, that there is a single mechanism of faculty of practical reason which is modeled on reflective deliberation, and that is this mechanism is responsive to reasons for action. But in cognitive sciences, as probably many of you know, cognitive scientists developed a different view of cognition, according to which there are, so to speak, two minds which correspond to two types of cognitive processes. And just a quick reminder, it is said that there is system one, which we maybe describe as intuitive mind, which is fast, automatic, does not utilize working memory, and usually only the results of its activity are conscious. And it is often said that this is a default system for cognition. And we have also system 2, which may be described as the analytical mind, which is slow, controlled, burdens working memory, and its operation is to a large extent available to consciousness. And in contrast to the intuitive mind, the analytical mind intervenes when the situation is new, difficult, and the person is sufficiently motivated, because it takes a lot of processing capacity to think about anything in a conscious manner. Well, obviously there are a lot of dual process theories of mind, which differ in major and minor features, and this is the account of Evans and Stanovich. And to illustrate the influence of the intuitive mind, let us recall the study on money priming here. It is very natural to explain the unconscious automatic influence of the money pride stimulus by working of the intuitive mind. We could say, for example, that money-induced self-sufficiency bias through system 1, and while subjects were unaware of the money-related influence, it would be interesting to see whether they would also try to fabricate a explanation of their action, just like in the Storms as Nisbet study, which would make them more moral or more rational, System 1 looks like a mechanism which is by its very nature reason responsive. I think there's no difficulty when we try to think about moral responsibility and System 1, because, as it was said, it works in a conscious, controlled, and analytic manner. But the question, it is not very obvious whether System 1, which is automatic, intuitive, to a large extent independent of consciousness, has also this feature. What are the difficulties connected with the possibility of System 1 being reason responsive? For example, we may ask, how could it be possible to weigh the beliefs and desires in an unconscious and automatic manner? It was assumed that it is very obvious by Storms and Nisbet, but remember that reason responsiveness, at least in philosophy, was modeled on deliberate thinking about conscious reflection. And another question, how it could be possible for System 1 to reliably react to appropriate reasons when it seems that it is relatively easily influenced by unconscious inappropriate reasons. For example, we can go back to the money priming experiment and see that the subjects in these experiments were related by, by reasons which may be described as inappropriate. For example, a belief that people are self-sufficient, that people shouldn't therefore people shouldn't expect help from anybody else. To stress this difficulty, it may be worth to say that it seems that, at least to very philosophers, non-conscious cognition and influences are viewed as alien to the agent. It's very difficult to conceptualize this, at least in a traditional reason. On a traditional reason responsiveness account. And it seems that conscious controlled reason responsiveness is understood as a dividing line between the actions for which we can justify moral responsibility and actions for which such an ascription is incorrect. What are the conditions on which person could be held morally responsible for her automatic unconscious behavior? Because it seems obvious that, intuitively we ascribe moral responsibility for certain behaviors like that, and I think it is worth looking at a very simple automatic unconscious behaviors for which there is no doubt that the person's question is not morally responsible. And an example of such a behavior is connected with the alien hand syndrome, which is a neurological syndrome which produces movements of hand which are which are not under control of the agent. And we can say, for example, such an alien hand would independently of the agent try to touch, grasp, or manipulate the objects in the direct vicinity of the agent. And basing on this example, what seems to undermine moral responsibility for the behavior of alien hand? So, first of all, this behavior, and it is quite obvious, cannot be directly inhibited by the person which suffers from such a syndrome. For example, such people try to block the behavior of the alien hand with their healthy hand, or they even try to tie down the alien hand. So it is obvious that they cannot directly inhibit this behavior, and we could say that they lack conscious reason responsiveness, because then they cannot directly inhibit this behavior. But there's also another feature of situations connected with the alien hand syndrome, which makes it a situation which is not related with moral responsibility, when we cannot justify the ascription of moral responsibility. We can find it by reflecting what caused the alien hand to behave. First of all, these behaviors do not seem to be mere reflexes. They seem to be behaviors which are caused by some features of the environment. Like, for example, things which the alien hand can grasp or manipulate. So these causes are representations of some features of environment. But these are representation of a very low quality. We can probably say that these representation represent only the so-called affordances. So basically things in the direct vicinity of the agents on which they can act. And this is, so there is no, there are no cases of, for example, a behavior of an alien hand which could be understood as being intelligent. So as being caused by at least some things like beliefs or desires of a proper representational power. So the second condition why in such cases ascription of moral responsibility is not justified is that the representations in question are not of a sufficient quality. They represent only very simple things. So a couple of conclusions. Conditions, first of all, conditions on which a person could be held morally responsible for automatic unconscious behavior. The first condition is the ability to directly inhibit the behavior and sufficient quality of representations involved. And these two conditions correspond to conscious and unconscious reason responsiveness. And obviously, it is very difficult to assess these two features with precision in the context of a particular examples of decision produced by system 1. Well, because, like I said, there are very many moot points concerning these two theories. For example, what are the exact features of system 1, system 2? What is their relationship? And reason responsiveness does not work in an all or nothing manner, but it comes in degrees depending on the strength of the ability of to inhibit the unconscious and automatic influences and the quality of the representations involved. Thank you for your attention.